Peace, everyone. So I'm going to do a little bit of reading from our Book of the Month Club. So this is the first one because, of course, we just started as an organization. This is September 2022. And again, this is called A New Origin Story, the 1619 Project. And it is created by Nicole Hannah Jones, winner of the Pulitzer, Pulitzer Prize, and the New York Times Magazine. So I don't want to keep this a really long video. So I pulled out 5 passages. 4 of them are poems, or not rhythmic necessarily, but prose, but they're very short. But first I want to go through some of the chapters here, okay? So through the table of contents. First of all, it is an anthology. There are many writers who contributed to this piece. So first you have the preface, which is Origins by Nicole Hannah Jones. And also within that preface, we have The White Lion, which is a poem by Claudia Rankine. Chapter 1, Democracy. And you have The Daughters of Azimuth and Loving Me within that chapter. Chapter 2 is Race. Then again, a couple of different, it seems that each chapter has a writing for the actual, the title of the chapter. So Race is a piece for chapter 3, Sugar is a piece for chapter 1, Democracy is a piece, so on and so forth. And then within each chapter, there are 2 other writings, okay? And I think that's where all the poems are. Yep. So there's like an essay or prose, and then you have poetry. Anyway, there are 18 chapters. And then you have about 80 pages of just acknowledgments, notes, contributors, and things of that nature, index. So it's a pretty full book. Let me say, before I even go in, if you buy this book, if you get it from Amazon or anywhere else, it's $38, I think. I bought 2 or 3, I think I bought 2 from Walmart, and they are, I think, $23. Even if you go onto the Walmart website, they're $23. Of course, if you have Audible, you can get it on Audible for like however much your thing is. I think I paid like $16 a month. So, and then you can drive around while you listen to it. Always with books, remember to check. I also have Scribd, which is awesome because it's, I think it just went up to $11 a month, but you have unlimited audiobooks, ebooks, magazines, podcasts, documents. And so, you know, check out these other sources if you don't have the money to buy a book or what have you. If you do have the money to buy a book, I would suggest that you try a local bookstore first, preferably a local person of color, POC bookstore, because they need a lot of help still. Or, of course, go to your library, support your library. And if you have a library card, which you need to have a library card, then you can download the Hoopla app or the Libby app, or there's just a lot of places to get books. You can get books PDF a lot of the times. 2 Clouds had like hundreds of books downloaded on his phone. Every new phone, he always had hundreds of books. What else? There are some like archival websites where you can get a lot of books online for free. So just before you go spending money, if you don't have it, try those things out, okay? Without further ado, we're going to go to the first one, the first poem, and it is titled Conjured. And actually, in fact, before those, at the beginning of each chapter, I think, with this, there's always a small piece. I guess it's like an introduction to the poem or something like that, or what, it's referring to. So, June 24th, 1731. An enslaved man named Samba, who works as an interpreter for the Superior Council in the French colony of Louisiana, is charged with planning an uprising. 2 years earlier, enslaved people and Native Americans joined forces in the Natchez Rebellion, which killed more than 200 French settlers in Louisiana. In its aftermath, rumors of new plots abounded. One concerned Samba, a bombarder man who had been a boatman on the Senegal River and was sold into slavery after attempting to lead an uprising against the French in Africa. For his alleged conspiracy in Louisiana, Samba and other plotters are either burned alive or broken on the wheel. So, Conjured by Honoré Fanon Jeffers. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing her name. The officer and I, the conspiracy to revolt, to the governor, who was very satisfied with my conduct, to have stopped these 8 conjured Africans without anyone noticing. That was a statement by Antoine Simon de Paget du Prats, Historie de la Louisiane. I don't speak French. How old? How tall? How kind? We won't ever know, but Samba kept plotting the demise of the French until his end. And all right, that's a tragedy for him, the one whose name means second son in the Fulbe language, as well as those other conspiring Africans who died alongside him. Were they conjured, as that Frenchman claimed, his excuse for scoring their flesh with fire, these men who dared to want freedom? Or did those brothers simply love Samba, a man who revolted once before, back in Africa, in some fort that was constantly tugged between the French and the Portuguese? Samba had refused to accept slavery. Perhaps he knew that death is a blink, a pain before crossing to a place of no bondage. And aren't you reading Samba's story right now? Aren't you curling your lips around his people's language and tasting the blood of struggle? And what of that colonizer who resorted to the cowardly will, recording what he believed to be victory over Samba? Be honest with me. Will you ever remember that Frenchman's name? That's right. So will you? What was his name? Do you remember? Let's see. The next one is Freedom is Not for Myself Alone. And the intro to it is November 7th, 1775. In the face of a growing patriot insurgency, Lord Dunmore, the royal governor of Virginia, issues a proclamation offering freedom to all enslaved people held by colonists sympathetic to the patriot cause in return for their joining the British Army. More than 800 enslaved men escaped to Dunmore's lines and enlist, wearing uniforms with the motto, Liberty to Slaves. Dunmore's regiment sees action in one major battle and several skirmishes, but smallpox soon decimates its ranks. Freedom is Not for Myself Alone by Robert Jones Jr. If you remember the ship, if it didn't take your mind from you, then you understand. When we get to the place where the paper tells us to go, first thing I ask the Tolbub, one of Lord Dunmore's soldiers, is what about my woman and my little boy? And he said that my freedom is for me and me alone. But how could it be that? What use is being forever unchained if my love's still bound up? These Tolbub, no matter where they're from, no matter how they sound, they share a strange way of thinking about freedom. They don't know what's free unless they line it up against what ain't. And for them, what ain't always got to be you. Give me liberty or give me death. We heard that a slave owner named Patrick Henry said that in a speech he gave to the other Tolbert. I laugh for two reasons. For one, he don't know what he said to be invitation for his own slaves to rise up against him. They feel yoked by their mother England like we yoked by our colonies. If they break the chains, they showing how we can break our own. And there is at least as many of us as there is them. Only guns make it uneven. For two, for people who have everything, they seem to know not a thing. The only way to have what's yours, and for no other reason than because you here, because you're alive, is to kill yourself to keep it. But if you remember the ship, the bellowing, rocking ship, you reckon they make it such that something so foolish makes all the sense in the world. I didn't even say goodbye to Catherine and William, because what use is there in remembering faces I ain't never going to see again? I just run off in the night with Right John and left Julius and me in the middle with them. Stumbling in the woods, looking for the spot where left Julius, the only one of us who can read, which cost him his left eye, told us the paper said we were supposed to go. When we finally arrived, the first thing I ask about is Catherine and William, and I know I was right to leave in silence instead of remembering their faces. When they put the rifle in my hand and dressed me up in soldier's uniform, with a bunch of other people by my side, some happy, some, like me, leaving everything behind so happiness won't ever be their fortune. I don't want to admit it, but holding that medal, cold until my grip warms it, makes me almost feel like a man. What I mean is, I almost feel like one of them, the Talbot, and the feeling ain't as repulsive as I thought it would be. They're going to put us on the front line, I know. This man ain't call us out here of the goodness of his graces. I knew that the minute they left me no choice but to abandon flesh and blood. I know I ain't nothing but one of many to be used as cannon fodder, a body to fill out his shrinking and stunted ranks, to help deny liberty to the men who deny me liberty, proving that Talbot have no idea what that word mean. Never did, and never will. Might be all worth it, though, to see the masses, overseers, and catchers running like cowards at the sight of us with the guns for once. To have us hooting and hollering like we on the hunt, holding torches high in the night so the shadows don't hide their trembling bodies. Shut down in the back, have their families weep over their bodies, and those of us who make it rejoice for our own selves and our own selves alone, which ain't hardly enough. I hope I ain't one of those who make it. I can't sail over those waters again. That's what they tell us going to happen. Those of us who fight for the crown and live to tell about it will be put on a boat and shipped off to England, whether we be triumphant or defeated. Crossing that same dreadful ocean that split us from our first families, with no promise that this trip will bring us anything different from what we got before, except having hearts broke twice instead of once. Who to say Dunbar is a man of his word? Never safe to trust Talbot. If you remember the ship, if it didn't take your mind from you, then you understand. That was a good one. I don't know if that's the proper pronunciation of that word, but had I read through before I started reading, I would have looked it up. But you could do that. All right, the next one, Bad Boy by Yag Yassi. 1932. This is the intro. 1932. The United States Public Health Service begins a Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male with more than 600 subjects, approximately 2/3 of whom have syphilis. White doctors tell their subjects only that they are being treated for bad blood. Ultimately, 128 men died from the disease and related complications. 40 of their wives are also infected, and 19 of their children are born with the disease. It is later revealed that for research purposes, the men were denied drugs that could have saved them. Bad blood. Upon closer inspection, the leaf of her 2-year-old was attempting to put in his mouth in the middle of the playground on that lovely fall day was in fact a used tampon. She snatched it from him and purelled both of their hands before rushing him back to their apartment on Dean. She put him in the bath and scrubbed, and by the time her husband found them, they were both crying. "We have to leave New York," she said after he put the baby to bed. "Let's move back home." "There are tampons in Alabama," he said. And then, what's the worst that could happen? It was the question they played out since graduate school, when her hypochondria had been all-consuming. Hypochondria had been all-consuming. Back then, leaning into her fears, describing them, had given her some comfort. But then they had Booker, and suddenly the worst looked so much worse. He could get an STD, and then we'd be the black parents at the hospital with the baby with an STD, and the pediatrician would call social services, and they would take him away, and we'd end up in jail. "Okay," he said slowly. "That would be bad, but it's statistically very, very unlikely. Would it make you feel better if we called the doctor?" She shook her head. Her husband only used the word statistically when he wanted to avoid using the words "you're crazy." She knew that the doctor would just tell her to trust him, but she also knew that when the worst happens in this country, it often happens to them. She comes by her hypochondria and iotrophia. What is that? Never saw that one before. Iotrophia. Iotrophobia. I never heard of that. Yes, I'm a nurse and I've never heard of it. So she comes by her hypochondria and iotrophobia honestly. When she was growing up in Alabama, people still talked about their grandfathers, fathers, and brothers who had died of bad blood. That was the catch-all term for syphilis, anemia, and just about anything that ailed you. The 600 men who were enrolled in the Tuskegee syphilis study were told they'd get free medical care. Instead, from 1932 to 1972, researchers watched as they developed lesions on their mouths and genitals, watched as their lymph nodes swelled, as their hair fell out, watched as the disease moved into its final stage, leaving the men blind and demented, leaving them to die. All this when they knew a simple penicillin shot could cure them. All this because they wanted to see what would happen. For years afterward, her grandmother refused to go to the hospital. Even at 89, perpetually hunched over in the throes of an endless cough, she'd repeat, "Anything but the doctor." Bad blood begets bad blood. She's more trusting than her grandmother, but she still has her moments. Like many women, she was nervous about giving birth. All the more so because she was doing it in New York City, where black women are 12 times as likely to die in childbirth as white women. And in that very statistic, the indelible impression of Tuskegee, the lingering, niggling feeling that she is never fully safe in a country where doctors and researchers had no qualms about watching dozens of black men die, slowly, brutally, simply because they could. When she held Booker in her arms for the first time and saw her grandmother's nose on his perfect face, love and fear rose up in her. "What's the worst that could happen?" her husband asked, and she can't speak it. The worst. Instead, she tries to turn off the little voice in her head, the one that wants to know. How exactly do you cure bad blood? Okay, this is the last short story or poem as they have them categorized. So this one is 1955 by Danez Smith. Feel the sneeze coming. I gotta sneeze, it won't come. So, intro. August 28th, 1955. Two white men kidnapped, beat, tortured, and murdered Emmett Till after the 14-year-old interaction with a white woman in a store in Money, Mississippi. The following month, the men, who will later admit to their crime, are acquitted by an all-white jury. Several months after this, Rosa Parks launches the Montgomery bus boycott. 1955. 2 hours west of Egypt, over in Money, that boy, in his overripe face, river wrecked, no seed, no amulet. My grandpa, 16 and singing, still small, fear-steadied years from his own violence, pulls the name from the radio, feathered and soaking. Stunned blue by the current silk trample and keep, with a soft name, you must hum to begin. You must hum to begin him, mama's massacred little man that may be martyred. Mural haunting wallets, a warning tucked between nephews. His face, no face, that face, his. His name wounds time. His face a knife sinking through centuries. But centuries don't fit in a year or in a boy's guiltless hands by grandpa before he was anyone's flinch, stood in the kitchen with crows in his chest. He was no sky, and yet in his hands a boy dead enough to be an angel, too drenched to fly, my pa. A sky stood in wait for the river to drain from wings. Where was you, someone, when the drowned refused flight, and Mamie left his mushy mug to wind and flies, flashes and eyes. That year Rosa utters a coordinated no, and the world takes off as my James takes the train north into another white cold, kill, and that name still soggy and refused in his hands, and all over, all he touches, his daughter's, his wife's cheek, the split hogs, where he is secret and plush, everything wet with it. Listen, this is true. My grandma met him 2 summers before. Then with his little quartet, he bought her ice cream and laid ditties at her flats. Summer, evil, bright, constant, changes a boy, fills him with a grown terror. I never heard James' song, not one lowly peep. Ooh, I checked that one up, but it's actually deep. You know, I think that there's still this idea that Emmett Till whistled at the white woman. That's still what I always hear, like all these years later. But I think in 1994, I actually still have the magazine. Emerge magazine interviewed Mamie Till, and she said, there was a couple of things that she said. She said that it wasn't actually the white woman who told, it was Emmett's cousin who told. Because according to her, he was very jealous. You know, he had this northern Yankee coming down there looking all, clean and dapper, and got all these stories about, I think they were from Chi-Town, right? Chicago. All these northern stories and things, and just the confidence. And his very own family had a problem with that.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
Siri, hush. So yeah, and she went on to say that the cousin, as he became an adult and was going on in life, that he actually went crazy, that he would hear voices. And she attributed that to the fact that he actually told that his cousin whistled at this white woman. And if I remember correctly, I believe he went to the white man and said this. And so, you know, he was murdered viciously, brutally. Like, I honestly think the devil himself look at humans and be like, wow. The other thing she said in that article, in that interview, was that she did not believe that, like, she was basically like 1,000,000,000% sure that he did not whistle at the white woman, that he actually had a speech impediment. He stuttered. And so what she had taught him to do is, because if you've ever been around a stutterer, it's, you know, they have a hard time. They keep, you know, stuttering their speech. And I think what happens, and I heard Steve Harvey talk about this because he had a really bad stuttering problem when he was young. He said that what happens is when a person starts to stutter, you know, you get more anxious. They get more anxious, and then they stutter more. You know what I mean? And, you know, people he's talking to just standing there waiting like, yeah. And so he said it just, you know, messes them up more, which I can understand. But so his mom, Miss Mamie, said that what she taught him was when you get stuck on a word and you start stuttering, you relax and you blow out. And the blowing out is the whistle. So she said she believes he wasn't whistling at her. He was trying to speak, whether it was to her, the store owner, the cousin, who knows, I don't know. But this is what she said. And I'm going to tell you, I can relate to a degree because she had a really hard time, it seems. I guess maybe she came to peace with it or something. But of course, she questioned herself, you know, like, had I not taught him how to do that, would he still be alive? And I can relate because my son came from the city, and a lot of people thought he was a little bit too confident. And of course, they looked at it as him being cocky and all this kind of thing. Again, it was confidence. And he had every right to be confident. And a lot of people who he was trying to help had a big problem with that, his confidence, and had very ill will towards him, and did really nasty things to him. So I can relate, and I can relate to her, although I don't really question it, because I believe that he was supposed to go there to help his people. And as I said in another video, he made clear to me that in the beginning days, especially when, you know, he was being shot at by rich white folks up there, you know, tribal people coming at him and all this kind of stuff, that the only reason he stayed was because of me. You know, he would call me and we'd talk about it. And, you know, I'd tell him, like, you know, when you're fighting for liberation, these are the things that are at risk. Life and limb, as the old folks say. And so I don't feel bad that I encouraged him to stay there. And then, you know, eventually he stayed only because he made a promise to the Creator that he would stay and fight for his people. Because, you know, nobody was doing it. So, you know, but I can ask myself the same question, like, if I hadn't sent him up there, if I hadn't kept bugging him to, like, talk to his grandma and find out, you know, their history and, you know, get a copy of their lineage and all that kind of stuff. And then once he, you know, went up there, if I hadn't encouraged him, or if I didn't encourage him to go, you know, to actions and things like that and protest, would he still be here? And I mean, I don't get caught up in that because, again, I believe that the Creator sent him there. And anyway, that's a little tidbit that I know about Miss Mamie and that situation. according to her. I should actually find the magazine and take screenshots and upload it, post it on the on our Beyond Cloud social media, Facebook, Instagram, maybe even a website. So here's the last one, and this is a little bit longer. I'll try not to stumble too much. So this one is called Dispossession. Can you see that picture? So the caption reads, two young Ho-Chunk women, Carrie Yelp, and her native name is Unuka. That's the one on the left. And her cousin, Annie Lowe Lincoln, whose native name is Redbird, circa 1904. And this picture is taken from the Wisconsin Historical Society. So again, this one is titled Dispossession and is written by Tia Miles. And I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's long. I think I counted 18 pages. Well, maybe not 18 for this one, but it's long, so I won't do the whole thing. I'm really just giving y'all a little taste of what's here so you can go ahead and start reading your book if you haven't yet. So, on November 18th, 1785, a contingent of Cherokee people arrived at Hopewell Plantation on the bucolic banks of a South Carolina river for a meeting that would help set the structure of the American racial hierarchy for centuries to come. It was the first in a set of negotiations between the United States and the Cherokee, Choctaw, and Chickasaw nations. In the aftermath of the American Revolution, these negotiations will begin to lay the groundwork for the relationship between the United States and Native governments. In the United States, if the United States was to consolidate and grow as a country, it had to contend with all of the indigenous people who, though devastated by over a century of imperial and colonial battles, were still populous and powerful, and who controlled most of the American continent. Native people were critical to the American economy as the procurers of skins for the profitable fur trade, and they also posed a threat to American settler communities. In the years before the American Revolution, Cherokees and English colonists in South Carolina had carried out attacks against one another amid trade disputes and cultural misunderstandings, and in retribution for prior killings. These altercations led to the deaths of nearly 200 Carolinians at Cherokee hands in the year 1760 alone, and disrupted the racial power structure by giving some enslaved black people the opportunity to flee their English captors. A year later, following what is known as the Anglo-Cherokee War, English troops crushed nearby Cherokee towns, pushing the Cherokees into a defensive posture that lasted through the cataclysmic war that broke out between the Patriots and the English in the 1770s. At the time of that war, the largest indigenous societies south of the Ohio River in the 18th century, the Cherokees, Choctaws, Chickasaws, Cree, and Seminoles, resided in hundreds of towns linked by kinship, language, religion, cultural practices, economic exchange, and governing structures across the present-day states of North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Tennessee, Alabama, and Mississippi. When the colonists resisted the British and mounted an armed defense that evolved into full-scale war, Native people, squeezed by both sides, had to choose alliances. As the conflict intensified, many large and influential Native nations leaned towards Great Britain. Once it was over, the indigenous people knew that if they were to survive the encroachment of their land, the taking of natural resources, and the local violence that an ambitious new nation in their midst portended, they had to come to terms with the victor in that contest. And so the Cherokee contingent traveled to Hopewell. The land on which discussions would unfold was a plantation, a place where enslaved people would be forced to labor against their will. owned by General Andrew Pickens, a formidable South Carolina militia leader during the American Revolution. Pickens had been a man of modest means from a South Carolina interior Scots-Irish family, who gradually rose to prominence during the war years. By 1773, Pickens had managed to obtain 2 enslaved black people, an essential first step in his climb up the Southern social and economic ladder. In July 1784, in recognition of his service in America's Revolutionary War, General George Washington awarded Pickens 573 acres on the Kiowa River. This fertile land had previously belonged to the Cherokees, who had generally sided with the British in the conflict and had been badly beaten by Washington's army. For a low price, Pickens quickly acquired adjacent parcels totaling over 1,000 acres, which he registered in the names of his children, including a future governor of the state, Andrew Pickens, Jr. With his newfound wealth and status secured, Andrew Pickens, Sr. had a sizable house built near a majestic oak tree and began his career as a country gentleman. Pickens was joined by 3 men from elite families who also enslaved people and whom Congress had appointed as treaty commissioners. Colonel Benjamin Hawkins, the son of a wealthy tobacco agriculturalist from North Carolina, would conduct the bulk of the negotiations. Joseph Martin, who hailed from a wealthy Virginia clan, and General Lackland McIntosh, a Georgia rice agriculturalist, would participate as well. The commissioners had expected a small cadre of indigenous representatives to appear when they invited the headmen of the Cherokee Nation to convene at Hopewell. They were shocked when 500 Cherokees arrived, including women, and soon after several hundred more. They weren't joking. These congregants may have expected the distribution of diplomatic gifts from their hosts, which was an indigenous custom picked up by the French and, to a lesser extent, the British. In addition, at the time, Native peoples of the South were deeply democratic and arrived at decisions by consensus. Ultimately, 2 individuals, Corn Tassel and the beloved woman, Nan-Yehi, or Nancy Ward, both of Chotatown, emerged as chief spokespeople. Under the branches of the large oak tree, in the shadow of a plantation house, the Cherokee leaders and the commissioners met to formalize a settlement. Corn Tassel and the beloved woman, Nan-Yehi. First of all, that is her entire name, okay? Her name is beloved woman, Nan-Yehi. So Corn Tassel and the beloved woman, Nan-Yehi, attempted to defend their claim to the southern soil. These leaders complained about the thousands of white people who had encroached on their lands and made homes there, urging the treaty commissioners to remove them as a condition of the peace. The American officials asserted that they had no power to act because the squatters were so numerous. There was nothing they could do. The Cherokee negotiators suspected that Hawkins and the rest were being disingenuous. In many ways, these settlers were the advance guard of U.S. expansion into indigenous territory. Corn Tassel responded with more than a hint of sarcasm. Are Congress, who conquered the King of Great Britain, unable to remove the people? He asked. But the commissioners made it clear that the Cherokees must sign agreements with the Americans in order to avoid the devastation of further conflict. And it would have been apparent to the Cherokee leaders that they had little choice. A grand cotton plantation owned by the military leader made the ideal setting to demonstrate American presence, authority, and expectations. Pickens was also known by Native leaders for his brutality. He had personally led violent incursions into the villages of the Cherokees during the war, and as Colin Calloway, a colonial historian, put it, his militia hacked to death the defenseless occupants as they fled on foot. On November 28, 1785, 10 days after the Cherokees had arrived, American and Cherokee negotiators agreed to the terms of the first Treaty of Hopewell. The Cherokees would accept the protection of the United States of America and no other sovereign. They would return all U.S. prisoners, as well as, quote, restore all the Negroes and all other property taken during the late war from the citizens, end quote. Some of these black former captives were being held in unfree status among the Cherokees, and others had married into Native families. The treaty also stipulated that the Cherokees were to abide by a set of geographical boundary lines drawn between themselves and white Americans. In return, the United States agreed to prohibit its citizens from settling on the lands westward or southward of the said boundary, excluding lands inside those boundaries that Corntassel had explicitly highlighted as an area where many white people were already illegally living. The United States also promised to regulate trade between Cherokee people and white people and to treat the Cherokees justly. If the Cherokees handed over the black people and other property, quote, and respected the new boundaries and U.S. law, the hatchet, quote, the commissioners attested, shall be forever buried. The first Treaty of Hopewell was followed by two others that winter, with the Choctaws and the Chickasaws, with nearly identical stipulations. Hawkins, the principal negotiator, effectively hemmed in large populations of Native people with the establishment of explicit official borders. The American insistence on crafting treaties at the national level recognized Native political and territorial sovereignty, but the terms of the treaties subordinated Native nations to the American nation. They also understood a meaningful difference between Native and Black people. Just as the colonies have formerly been under the protection of the British, Native nations will now be under the protection of the Americans. And while that protected status was arguably a less independent one than had previously existed, it was nevertheless a privileged one in relation to African Americans. Whereas members of the Native nations were citizens of their own countries, deserving, at least on paper, human and political rights, African Americans were citizens of nowhere and undeserving even of the rights of personhood. During these 3 visits to Hopewell, the Native participants learned important lessons from the plantation scenes displayed before them and from the language of the treaties. White people were citizens, Black people were possessions, and indigenous people were now subject to national interference. In order to maintain the protection of the United States from its own citizens, Native leaders were being indirectly encouraged to participate in a form of racial hierarchy that was considered part and parcel of civilized American society, one that distorted Native and Black relationships ever since. Today, African Americans and Native Americans share the highest incarceration and poverty rates in the country, as well as the lowest high school graduation numbers. Both groups appear at the bottom of a range of health and well-being indicators, and both have suffered high rates of serious illness since during the COVID-19 pandemic. And yet the two groups have often struggled to find solidarity, a painful legacy of the way they learned to regard each other in the nation's formative years. And I will stop there. Let me say, I don't know how some people might take this. We have the right to our own opinions. However, I will say statistically, Native Americans have it worse, if you can believe that, right? Because Black Americans, or people who appear to be Black Americans, get messed over so much by police, by medical systems and all this. But it is a statistical fact that Native Americans have it far worse than African Americans. the women are harmed, murdered, kidnapped more. And, you know, Black Americans have the very good argument that, of course, compared to white women, if something happened to a Black woman, you almost never would hear about it on television or news programs, or, you know, the help is not the same, like far less than with white women. Or just imagine Native American women are worse than that, of get less anything than that. Police brutality is more prevalent within Native American communities. Health disparities are far greater in the Native American communities, and so on and so forth. And I say that because, as this book is pointing out, or that passage that I just read pointed out, is that there is still such a separation, it seems to me, between Natives and Blacks in this country. And I think it's on both sides. I don't think it's one-sided at all. I know am within Black American circles a lot, whether it's, online and absolutely, in real life and stuff. And I've heard it many, many times. People have this argument, very incorrect arguments, but they have this argument of, one like, well, they never helped us. Have we helped them? The we and the them. So, you have that stuff going on. And I personally, my personal opinion is that while Black Americans have had it extremely rough in this country over the past 400 plus years, Black Americans are not the only one that have been screwed over by this government, like severely. And I think people really have this idea. I remember reading Trevor Noah's book, his autobiography, and he had this passage where he talked about when he and his friends did a Jewish bar mitzvah, and they did, it's so crazy. So they did this Jewish bar mitzvah. They DJ'd, like his friend was a DJ, and he and his other friends were the dancers, and they booked this gig, and it was like, oh, great. He explained that in Africa, people often name their children anything that has to do with like white people. And so his friend's name was Hitler. They don't know about the history and all that kind of thing, I guess. So, they were dancing, and Hitler was the DJ, I think. And so they're dancing and getting it in, and they're like, go Hitler, go Hitler, go Hitler. And of course, the Jewish people were like, excuse you? And so they like got dismissed and everything. And he was saying that, he said that, oppressed people always think that their oppression is more stifling than the next person's, you know what I'm saying? And I really, really think that with all the hate and trauma and everything that African Americans have suffered and continue to suffer in this country, that oftentimes people think that that suffering supersedes everybody else's suffering. And I'll remind you that white colonization has been happening all over the world. So, yeah. And not just colonization by, Europeans and, the European diaspora, by their own people in a lot of places. They, if you look into any, documentaries and stuff, I'm a huge documentary buff. So if you look into things that happen to women over, in India, or what happens to, people in different areas in Africa and so on and so forth. Like, for us to just be like, we have it worse and forget them, is just, I don't think, and not just African Americans, like anybody who has that idea is like, stop, because it's just not true. But so of course, you know, a lot of people look at Native Americans, and I can't tell you how many people I have heard say, like, you know, like, for instance, they don't need reparations. They already got free land and they got free education. Boy, that is so not true. I don't know. Y'all got to look into stuff and get some facts, because it ain't hardly true, okay? There's a handful of, there's hundreds and hundreds of recognized tribes, or, you know, tribes throughout America and Canada. And I know in America, there's just like a handful that are even state recognized. You don't even want to talk about federally recognized. So it's just simply not true. And they have to be recognized by the American government, the oppressors, that, hey, you're real. And of course, you know, that's what my son was fighting against. And then us being Afro-Native, heavy on Afro, that, you know, I watched my son, because he's was so much darker than me, that, you know, I saw what he had to go through as being Afro-Native or a Black Indian. So, you know, the things that got thrown at him, the racial epithets that were thrown at him, and he got it from both sides. You know, Black people love to like, oh, you Indian, you know, but everybody always saying that they Indian, which is so crazy, because it's like, which one are you? You want the supposed prestige of saying like, yeah, you know, my grandmother said we Cherokee, but what are you doing? You know, are you becoming allies with the Cherokees or the Blackfoot or these people, that people? And then, you know, he got it from a lot of natives. Now, of course, it's not across the board. We're talking about individuals who are just buttholes. And like anybody else, I mean, plenty of Black Americans are, you know, have like racist tendencies, you know what I'm saying? Or racial, whatever you want to call it, tendencies. And of course, the colorism and stuff like that. We all been colonized, right? And so a lot of them have the same issues. So just my son, I saw go through all these types of things. But yeah, I just wanted to offer that little tidbit. This video has gone on and on and on. I hope that my stumbling over words did not deter you from getting this book. It's really, 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 really good. So again, Beyond Clouds book club, the adult book club, because we also have a youth book club. And please do encourage your children to participate. I'll be doing another video on the children's September book of the month, which is A Mango Shaped Space, which is really, really good. I read it a couple of years ago at my daughter's request, and it was actually really good. It's a YA book, but it's really good. So yeah, the adult book club, we are having a virtual discussion about it on Zoom on Saturday, October 1st at 8:00 p.m. So that's a Saturday, because I want to bother y'all on Sunday, because I know you're trying to relax, go to church, get your week started. So we will be doing this Saturday, and it'll be on Zoom, so you can be in your car driving, and we just all kicking it. Bring you a nice snack, bring you something in your cup. I don't care what it is. And, you know, just sit back and, you know, discuss this book. If you don't finish it all, it's fine. If you've already read it, come on through. You don't have to read it in September. If you weren't able to get it and just interested to see what it's about and see what people, you know, opinions are about it, just come on through. You know, Beyond Clouds, I started Beyond Clouds to continue my son's work, but to also expand it and delve into different things that he was also into. And reading, if you don't know that Two Clouds was a book fanatic and he actually read them, then you ain't know Two Clouds. He has so many books. even when he was a teenager, he just went everywhere with a bag full of books. He's always read like vintage books and documents and stuff like that. It's just this thing. We're like history buffs. I should probably do a video on my little library. We have a room that's an actual, like, our personal library. We've been blessed to just have a room to be able to do that in. But so this is, literacy is extremely important to us here at Beyond Clouds, and also community. So my intention is to formulate a community within Beyond Clouds, So come on through to the discussion group, and you have to register though, because and I figure out how to do that. Right now, register would just be come on the Facebook Beyond Clouds page, or you can go to Instagram. The handle there is beyond_clouds, the number 7 _ then the number 3. Okay, so with that, I'm gonna let you go and get back to my reading. Peace.